Shalom and welcome to the first week of Voices of Torah, where we will be journeying, and I must state this is a journey through the Torah, through the weekly portion, where I will be pointing out some things, discussing a few things, talking about opinions, talking about beliefs, talking about conversations that have been had about certain things in the Torah, about the words, about the letters, about the wonder, the mystery. And it is my hope that throughout our journey together, through the next weeks, months, and year, that you will start to build within yourself a love and a desire for more of the Torah. It's quite amazing for me to think and look back over the last 10 years of my life on this journey that I've been on into Torah. And I want to explain that because from my perspective, from my perception of that statement, into what that means is that I experience going into the living Word of God. And what that means is that it impacts me on a deep level, both intellectually and emotionally. And for me, it's literally like being surrounded by a voice, the voice of God. And there's something profound in that. And we will see very quickly that this is an exceptionally important idea about the voice of God and the subsequent importance of our voice as well. We're going to see that very quickly in the first 3 chapters of Torah in the Book of Bereishit. And so the last 10 years have been such a wonderful journey of expansion for me, and I want to really introduce that idea and that concept to you as we work our way through the Torah, because it's the expansion of our awareness of the voice of God that changes the fundamental way we view not only reality but ourselves and how we function within creation. God has a desire for us, and that desire is very complex, it's very complicated, and there have been many conversations about this for the past 3,000 years. And stop and think about that for a moment. The Torah was given into creation in recorded time, 3,334 years ago. And the reason that we're able to put such a number on the table and be fairly confident that it's accurate is because the recorded history of Torah is there for everybody to research. To me, that's an amazing thing. God places so much value on this message that He's maintained the integrity of it for over 3,000 years. It is the central tenet, the central document as a scroll that defines the capacity for humanity to understand that there is a God, that monotheism, that the idea that there is a one God, there is a creator, one creator. All of this stems from this message, this letter of love, this letter of desire, this encapsulation of the heart of God given to us in what we perceive as a written form, but is in fact the living breath of God. It's such a wonderfully beautiful thing. So when I talk about journeying into Torah, that's part of the journey. So what I want to do firstly in this session together, I want to sort of unfold the nature of Torah and how it works to engage with us. Because remember, I've talked about coming into the living breath of God. We're coming into this amazingly, deeply multi-layered message that functions on multiple dimensions. And when I say multiple dimensions, I'm talking about depths of layers of understanding. So we can think of that spatially, of course, but I want you to think of it in regards to your capacity to perceive more dimensionally than you're perceiving right now. So we think in regards of, height, width, depth, time. So everything has functions within that perception. But language moves beyond that. It takes us into the realm of the imagination. What happens in our imagination when it's engaged by language? What happens is that pictures begin to form, ideas, concepts, even concepts and ideas that can't be formulated in an image way, but move towards image. It's an amazing thing. Again, something to think about. But how does the Torah do this? There are two forms of, or two forms of engagement that are working here. One is the idea of the story. Okay, so this is the narrative, the narrative of engagement between players in the story. So think of it in regards to, reading a book, seeing a movie. We have characters. So the Torah is full of characters. It's full of people. But it's also full of ideas. It's also full of what we call mishpatim, laws. And so it's this idea of both law and narrative. So when I talk about law, I'm not talking about this idea of must do, must not do. Because it's not about that, and I will let that idea sort of formulate as we go through our time together. But I want to focus in on this idea of story as truth, because this is something that we are introduced to very quickly. We see it in the narrative, and the way that God speaks to people, and the way that people speak to each other. It engages with us on an intellectual and an emotional level. And this is also a very key idea behind how we as humans engage with information. We have to recognize that God created us intellectually and emotively. And this comes back to the idea of how desire functions as well. But I don't want to get off track. We're already getting off track too quickly. So I just want to read to you from my notes here about this idea of story as truth. So it starts with a question. What is the functional purpose of Berashit, in the beginning? This Parsha that we're about to quickly investigate. Now, we're going to, through our time together, I'm going to introduce you to commentaries or commentators. And I think it's important to do that, because these are people. These are people that formulated ideas through the engagement of Torah. And they had discussions and debates and arguments, and there's a lot of toing and throwing of ideas, and there's disagreement, and there's agreement, and there's a desire to find resolution between the disagreements. This is the fundamental nature of what it means to be human, and that is that we have perception. We have agency, we have free will, we have the capacity to look at something from a different perspective than another person. And how we resolve perception is through discussion. And again, how do you start that? How do you do this? Do it with story. You do it in story form. In other words, you present an idea, the beginning of an idea, in the form of story. And this is what the commentators do. This is what they talk about. They wrestle over these issues that come forth in the Torah. They ask strange questions, because it's the question that directs the conversation. And this is what God does with us. And you'll see this very quickly in the narrative when he's talking to the man. He's talking to Adam, the human. He says, why? Why did you do this? What motivated you to do this? Look, with a question leads to conversation. In his commentary to Torah, he is a commentator on the Tanakh as a whole. His commentary on the Talmud is also prolific. So he's a very important figure in Judaism. And Rashi lived, again, here's another person that lived in what we know as modern-day France. And he was around from 1040 to 1105. And of course, I encourage you to go. I mean, it's easy to find out about these people. Go onto Wikipedia, put in their names: Rashi, Rashi, or the Ramban, Ramban. So the Ramban, what he does is he looks at what Rashi talks about, and sometimes he does not agree with Rashi. And there's another commentator that the Rambam talks about as well, and this is Ibn Ezra. Now, Ibn Ezra is a very interesting figure. So Ibn Ezra is, we would call him a contemporary of Rashi as well. But Ibn Ezra, or Abraham Ibn Ezra, so Ibn Ezra, was born and lived in Spain. So we would call him Sephardic. So Sephardic is just the Hebrew word for Spain. Now, the interesting thing about Ibn Ezra is that he was a prolific grammarian, so he was big on the exegesis of the Hebrew text. And so if you read about him in Wikipedia and other Jewish websites, you'll find that he was a poet and a thinker. Love that. A creative type. Very important people, creative types. And so the vast majority of his work was composed after 1140. So he lived between, I think it was 1089. I think the exact time of his birth is questioned. But we know that he died around 1164. Okay, and so he composed most of his works in Hebrew. The Rambam, what he does, and this is what subsequent commentators always do, is they look to engage in the conversation. So anyway, the Rambam, what he does, he comments. Now let's get back to this word Berashit, and so the idea of story as truth. So the Rambam comments on the word Rashit. Now, if we look at this word here, you'll notice that there's a couple of important things that we need to see. And that is that we have this word, we have the letter bet, okay, which is working as a prefix, okay, so it sits at the beginning of the word and adds to the word, a preposition prefix, sorry. And this is where we get the translate the word in. So in Bereshit. So what does Bereshit mean? Well, Bereshit is a combination made up of from the word resh, which means head. So the head is considered to be the first of all importance. Now, what's really fascinating is that you have at the end of the resh, the aleph and the shin, you have a yod and a tav, which is where we get Bereshit. Okay, and so Bereshit, and I don't want to get into the technical terms of it, but it's the yod and the tav suffix indicates that this noun is a denominative abstract noun. Okay, so that means that the word beginning is an abstract noun developed from the noun head. Okay, so Bereshit in the beginning is literally in the head, and so Rambam comments on this word, and I want to talk about this because it comes down to the first fundamental discussion of what is going on here. Why is God using such language to begin the Torah? So Rambam, or Maimonides, comments on the word Berashit in his guide to the perplexed, that Berashit does not mean beginning in the sense of beginning first of a chronological sequence. Now this is very strange. So what he's saying is that don't think of this as the beginning of everything. Don't think of it chronologically. Now this is something else that escapes the Western mind when it comes to Torah. The Torah is not written as a chronological history story or narrative. You will find this when we get into Exodus and Leviticus, the Book of Numbers, that things seem to appear in and out of order. And there's a lot of commentary and discussion about why is that. And we'll get to that. We'll discuss it as we come across it, because it is very important, because it points out the way we shouldn't approach Torah as opposed to the way we should. But that's a discussion for later on. So Bereshit implies the most significant element, the part that stands for the whole, the foundation, the principle. Now this is where I want to sort of introduce to you a very interesting idea in regards to how Torah functions in presenting an idea to us. And that is that in the first initial encounter, the whole is actually present. In other words, the initial idea or the initial statement also contains the end of the matter. And I'll discuss this more in detail soon. So, I would like to posit that Bereshit, in the beginning, is the beginning of the story of humanity and the unfolding realization of how we as humans respond to God and the revelation of His desire for us. Now that's quite a statement, and why am I making that statement? I'm going to clear that up in a minute. Let me just continue on with my notes. So when we view Torah as an interactive narrative, our perception of who we are inside the scope of this narrative takes on a more reflective, conversational, and interactive state of being. In other words, what I'm saying is that we are able to place ourselves in the dialogue. We're able to place ourselves in the narrative. We're able to place ourselves in the story. In other words, it's designed to appeal to us on a personal manner. It's designed to confront us in a way that allows us to begin to relate to the form of the language that is being expressed. In other words, it impacts our imagination. It impacts into the way we think. It touches our emotions. Anything that touches your emotions becomes personal straight away because you relate to the feeling of the emotion. Consider how music works. Consider how you can listen to a song that someone has written. Now, you don't know what motivated them to write that song. You don't know what was happening in their life. What emotion were they feeling? What were they thinking? What is the song even about? For some strange reason, we take music and we apply our own narrative and situation to it to make it personal to us. And this is why music is so powerful to impact the generation, because it becomes, in a strange way, almost irrationally, we think the song is about us. Because it's engaging with us on an emotional level. It's engaging with the emotion of our soul, with the desire of our soul. The Torah is doing exactly the same thing. In fact, I would say that the human condition comes out of the way Torah engages with humanity. It inspires our art. It inspires our music. It inspires our worship. It inspires our conversation because it is deeply personal from the outset. So knowing is interactive. The story narrative transitions from observation to participation. So when we read this statement, in the beginning, Berashit, we are transported into the mystery, the wonder. What is going on here? I want to know what this means. That the question, the longing in us, suddenly, boom, becomes activated. And this is exactly what happened with me when I heard this word. Bereshit, Bereshit. Oh, wow. Bereshit, bara Elohim. It hashamayim va'it haaretz. For some reason, the sound of that, it comes into our ears, so we hear before we see. What does that mean? We'll get to that later on. But it comes into our auditory. Our whole being hears it and starts to respond to it. Our spiritual nature, our soul responds. There is a movement within us towards the source of that sound, towards the beginning of it. Oh my gosh, such powerful stuff. Now stop and think and apply that to the whole thing, to the whole of the Torah. The whole of the Torah is a singular expression to facilitate or to inspire or to cause a response from the hearer, to cause a response to the person or those, the community that has come into contact with the voice of it. See why the voice is so important? This is the beauty of why this is called Voices of Torah. It's the voice of the Torah that engages with our voice, our voices. And this is why the commentators are so important, and why I'm going to spend so much time discussing and introducing you to what they talk about, because it's going to force a response in you, and that's what I want to do. So the mechanism of story is universal, yet deeply personal on a meditative and expressive level. The Torah is written for all. It's written for all of humanity. It came in a very specific way. And that's very important to consider. And we'll get to that when we go into Exodus. We get into Leviticus, when the Shemot, the names, Vayikra, and he called. These wonderful terms and words that escape us or are unknown to us until we hear the voice of someone talking about it. I just want to read you a quote from Rabbi Sachs of Blessed Memories, introduction to the book of Genesis in his book Covenant and Conversation on Genesis. He says this, he says, Judaism is about the democratization of holiness. We'll discuss holiness in a minute. The creation of a society in which everyone will have access to religious knowledge. Hence the importance of stories which everyone can understand. In other words, it meets us at the level of our perception. What a statement. It meets us at the level of our perception to inspire us to begin a journey into the depth and the wonder of what is waiting to be shown to us, because we turn our ear to hear the voice of God. Each of its stories has layer upon layer of meaning and significance, which we only grasp after repeated readings. That's why the Torah is a lifestyle. It's not just the idea of study, it's the idea of living Torah. So it becomes living in you. It gains a place of expression in you because you have allowed that to happen through the agency of your choice. So each age, our understanding of the book grows as we grow. So each age adds insights, commentaries and interpretations of its own. It's this beautiful, wonderful collective debates and agreement and disagreement. It's all there to help us grow. Okay, the book's literary style allows it to be read afresh in each generation. Oh my gosh, that is profound. That's profound. That too tells us something significant about the Torah's view of human knowledge. The truths of the human condition are simply too deep to be understood at once and on the surface. Only stories have this depth, this ambiguity, this principled multiplicity of meanings. Most importantly, only stories adequately reflect what it is to be human. So the challenge of these stories, narratives, words, letters, and phrases is to go beyond, to go through. This is what I said at the beginning when I talked about my journey of my journey into Torah. So what does this mean? Consider your first exposure to a good story, a book, a movie, a poem, a Bible verse. So for many of us, we experience the emotion of the narrative first. Then if we meditate or ponder the message of the narrative, we engage our intellect to consider the emotion and relevance of our perceptual understanding. Sometimes we are confronted by such an alien concept that we are confused and unsure how to respond in our consideration. Sometimes our ambivalence allows only a cursory thought and nothing more. Isn't that humanity? Therefore, the challenge is, how do we consciously wrestle with the juxtaposition of our reality perception and the evolving perception that the Torah presents to us? To even understand this process and give it a priority of imperative. In other words, to place the voice of God above all other voices. I'm going to say this again. The Torah is the voice of God given to us in a written form that comes alive as soon as we turn our heart to engage with it. So the Torah, the depth perception that is unfathomable, yet is our most precious pursuit. This is the pursuit to know ourselves and to know others. The interactive conversational unfolding and revealing of what it means to know truth. So story as truth is therefore the initiation of questioning what is the truth that I currently perceive, and how will this story add to or challenge that perception. So this is how Torah works. This is how it functions. This is what it does to us. It's a rather large narrative about, what is the Torah to me? But these are the things that I've been thinking about for the last 10 years. And this is how this word changed my life, because it revealed to me something quite profound. So I want to show you quickly what I discovered about this word that changed the way I thought about the way God wants me to relate to him and what he's trying to show me. And this is something that's still true. After I first observed this, over 10 years ago, probably sometime around 2008, 2009. Well, actually, no, sorry, somewhere around 2011. See, 2008, 2009 was when I was starting to wrestle with the idea of understanding how desire functions in relationship. And so it was profoundly amazing to me when I turned my attention to the Torah that I found encoded within the first word, within this word Bereishit. This word Berashit that I found encoded within it the allusion to the word for desire, ta'ava. Now we're going to see this word ta'ava turn up very, and it's hidden in the English, okay, but when we look at the Torah in the Hebrew, we see this narrative unfold time and time and time again. How do we harness the desire of the human heart and consciously turn towards the desire of God for us? So the word Bereishit, so we've already talked about this word resh, this word for head. So we have in the Torah, in this first word, we have this word head. And when we look at the word, we've got the first letter of the bet and the last two letters, the yod and the tav, form the word house. And then we have this word in the middle, which is resh. So we know that resh forms the word rashit. So in this, where we get the idea of beginning, okay? And so bet, in the beginning. So resh is head. Now, what is really fascinating about, I want to focus just quickly on this word bet and introduce to you, if you're not already familiar with it, the idea of the gematria, or the numerics of it. Because I want to show you how this word engages with us to introduce the idea that God has a desire for us and He wants to explain to us what that desire is, and that we are forced to respond to it. We are forced to respond to it and answer the question, how do I feel about this? What do I think? What does my intellect and my emotions conclude about this idea that God has a desire for me and that He wants me to learn about that desire? But firstly, I have to understand that I am created to have desire and that is a good thing. So the gematria of the word house is 412. How do we get that? Okay, so every letter in the Hebrew language has a number assigned to it. Okay, the letter bet has the numeric value of 2. It's the gematria is 2. So then we have the yod, which is the second letter, is the gematria of 10. And then the letter tav, which is the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, has the gematria of 400. So 2 plus 10 plus 400 equals 412. Now the gematria is there to work in regards to paradis, peshat, remez, drush, and sod. So peshat, the simple meaning. Rosh, what can we infer from this? So it's the capacity to look just below the surface and to see something that isn't obvious at first but comes obvious when we look at it. Drush is the homiletical. So what can we draw out? What is the bigger picture that the narrative leads us to begin to discuss? And that's important. The narrative leads us to discussion. This is the idea of the commentary. It leads us to discussion, the greater, bigger picture, so that we can draw out the meanings that are being percolated in our thoughts, in our imagination. The sod is the mystical, it's the mystery, it's the stuff that is hard to explain and sometimes elusive in its meaning. And it only comes about through the deep meditative and reflective state of sitting inside the narrative, inside the Torah, and allowing it to show us what we cannot conclude by our own perceptive state or level at being at. So the sod is designed to take us to a higher state of awareness. And of course then what does that do? It starts a deeper conversation which begins the process. So the sod is supposed to lead towards expansion of perception But it's a whole process. You can't go straight to the side. You've got to go through the simple to that, because it's designed as a progressive growth towards maturity. So the gematria is the beginning of that pathway, and it was the beginning of my pathway. So I realized and I learned that the word for desire, ta'ava, this word that we see there in the blue, has the same gematria numerical value as 412, as house. So the house, this brought me into a conversation with God. So this is me describing to you how my process of conversing with God about what I'm thinking about the word Bereshit. Because I knew that I was struggling with the concept of desire, and we have this really interesting dichotomy of belief system on this planet in regards to the difference between Eastern and Western thinking. When you come into the idea of Buddhism and sort of Eastern pantheism and all those sorts of things, the idea is that nirvana or transcendence, so the goal of most, let me say every spiritual belief system, is this idea of transcendence. So transcending the natural. Now Buddhism is very different, and this is something I think that permeates into the Western mindset because of its fixation with Easternism, and it's because of its desperation to turn away from monotheism. Because of the intellectual struggle of it, So in Buddhism, it's the idea that the self must dissipate, it must disappear. But this is very, very different in regards to the idea of that we are created with desire that is good, because desire is supposed to be harnessed to turn us towards the transcendent nature of God. And that is our pathway that He's placed us on towards Him. We walk towards Him for a reason, to become mature in His ways, so that we can be elevated, and in turn elevate that which is around us. And so I was struggling with the concept of that I perceived that desire was bad for me. So how do you deal with that conflict? If you think that something in you is bad, you want to get rid of it because you think it's destroying your spirituality. But when in fact desire is the tool with which God meets us. So encoded into this word Bereshit is the idea of desire. So then you ask the question, how do I understand your desire? How do I understand your desire, God? So I've got this little statement here. How does desire function in the context of creating? How does God express His desire to us? So these are the questions that I was asking, and which led to the conversation. So I immediately started to realize that the house of God, that the head of the house, that there is this place where God has provided an environment for me where I can begin to outwork the function of who I am in regards to how He is expressing the function of His engagement with me, and that it's all a living experience and expression. Wonderful. So I learned that I was being invited into the house of God, into this place of conversation. Now, if you want to, see a source text that promotes this idea, then just you go into Isaiah 56, that the house of God. So He says, my house will be called what? A house of prayer. What is prayer? Prayer is conversation with God. So the house of God is the environment where we encounter the full supply of His provision for us to know His desire. So this provides the framework where we engage with the living nature of His ways in His express desire for relationship. So this is wonderful stuff, wonderful stuff. And all of that is just from the beginning, Berashit, in the beginning, the engagement of our emotions with our intellect and our emotions with the word Bereishit. So let's just quickly talk about some of the other wonderful things that just sit in the first chapter of the book of Genesis, the book of Bereishit. Because there's, again, I'm just going to put these out there so that you can spend time pursuing the understanding of them yourself. Because this is not about me just giving you a whole bunch of information so you now know stuff. It's about facilitating the journey into the Torah. Okay, so the number 7 is very prominent in this narrative, in the creation narrative, and we see this in the first verse. So Berashit bara Elohim et hashamayim va'et haaretz. Okay, so there are 28 letters in this verse. There are 7 words. Okay. So 4 times 7 is 28. So there are 14 letters in the first half. Bereshit bara Elohim, 14 letters. That's 2 times 7. There are 2 groups of 7 in the second half. Et hashamayim, 7 letters. Va'et haaretz, 7 letters. So 14 letters. So Genesis 1 verse 2 contains 14 words. So it's got twice the amount of words as the first verse. Okay, 7 times 2. Genesis 2, 1-3 contains 35 words, which is 7 times 5. 5 is the number of the letter Hey. So this is where this is just wonderful stuff to me. I'm talking about the gematria, and that the letter Hey begins to introduce the concept that a God that seems to be distant in the name Elohim, as this absolute power, all of a sudden sits within the capacity of the letter Hey, introducing his breath to us so that we can engage with that breath and begin to learn how to entwine with that breath. Again, we're what? Coming into the Torah, into the living breath of God, which is the way he speaks. What is a voice? A voice is an expulsion of breath that gives voice or gives sounds to the inner dynamics of the heart, of the intellect, and of the heart, the emotion of the speaker. We're created in the image of God, so God is showing us how to converse with him. Genesis 1:1 to the end of Genesis 2:3, which is the creation narrative. Okay, there are 469 words, which is 7 times 67. The word tov, okay, tov, good. Now this is where I just want to point this out. When God created us, he looked at us and what did he say? It is good. When he created creation, all of creation, what did he say? It is good. By the time you get to the end of the first verse, what does he say? It is tov ma'od. It is very good. So this is how I can say and I can state that when God created us, he saw the function of the desire that he placed within us. The desire as a reflection of who he is, because we are created what? In his image, B'Tselem. So he crafted the desire in us to become a reflection of how his desire functioned towards us, so that we can have a meeting, a place of comparison, where we can compare stories, where we can compare questions. Isn't that what we do as humans? We compare stories. We share. We share stories. We share insights. We share commentaries. And it builds the community around the centrality of the story and the idea that is engaging with us as a living, functioning extension of God's desire towards us. Oh, so wonderful. So wonderful.